A struggling single father helped a woman change her tire, not knowing she was a millionaire. Before anything else, let's see how connected we really are. What's one thing you can see from your window right now? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as David Matthews pushed his daughter Emma's bright red stroller along the cracked sidewalk. At 33, David's weathered hands and tired eyes told the story of a man who'd been fighting life's battles alone for far too long. His worn Levi's jeans and faded blue flannel shirt had seen better days, just like everything else in his world since Sarah walked out 3 years ago. "Daddy, can we get ice cream today?" 6-year-old Emma asked, her bright blue eyes sparkling with hope despite knowing the answer would likely be no again. Her small hands clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, whose once white fur had turned gray from countless adventures and bedtime cuddles. David's heart clenched as he checked his worn leather wallet. $12.37 until Friday's paycheck from Peterson's auto shop. The bills were piling up faster than his modest income could handle, and Emma's growing appetite seemed to mock their shrinking grocery budget every day. "Maybe next week, sweetheart," he said softly, hating himself for the disappointment that flickered across her innocent face. "But we can stop by the park and feed the ducks with those crackers we saved from lunch." Emma's face brightened immediately. "Can Mr. Hoppy help feed them too?" "Of course he can, baby girl." As they rounded the corner near Riverside Park, where old oak trees provided shade for tired parents and playground equipment that had seen decades of children's laughter, David heard a woman's frustrated voice cutting through the peaceful afternoon air. "Come on, you stupid thing. Not today." A sleek silver Mercedes-Benz sat tilted at an odd angle near the park entrance, steam rising ominously from under the hood. The car looked completely out of place in this working-class neighborhood, like a diamond dropped in a pile of stones. A young woman in an expensive cream-colored designer dress knelt awkwardly beside the flat rear tire, her perfectly manicured hands now black with grease and dirt. Her auburn hair, which had clearly been styled professionally that morning, now hung in frustrated strands around her flushed face. Emma tugged insistently on David's shirt. "Daddy, that pretty lady looks really sad. Like when I dropped my ice cream last summer." Without hesitation, David approached the stranded motorist. "Excuse me, ma'am. Looks like you could use some help there." The woman looked up, pushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist to avoid getting more grease on her forehead. She was beautiful, maybe 28 years old, with the kind of polished elegance that spoke of a life David could only imagine. Her green eyes held a mixture of frustration and relief. "Oh, thank goodness. A real person who might actually know what they're doing," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor of stress. "I have an absolutely crucial meeting in exactly 1 hour downtown, and I have absolutely no idea how to change this infernal thing. I've called 3 roadside assistance companies, but they all said it would be at least 2 hours. I'm David, and this here is Emma," he said, already rolling up his sleeves with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd spent 6 years fixing cars for a living. "Don't you worry one bit. We'll get you back on the road in no time. Emma, can you be my special helper and watch for cars while Daddy works?" Emma nodded seriously, taking her job as official safety supervisor very seriously indeed. As David worked with practiced hands, loosening lug nuts and positioning the jack with the kind of mechanical precision that came from years of experience, Emma chatted animatedly with the woman whose name was Victoria Sterling. Victoria found herself charmed by the little girl's innocent questions and observations about everything from cloud shapes to why grown-ups always seem to be in such a hurry. "Do you have any little girls?" Emma asked with the directness that only 6-year-olds possess. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "No, sweetie. I don't have any children." "That's okay," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy says some people are meant to take care of different things. Maybe you take care of something else really important." Victoria glanced at David, who was focused intently on his work, and felt something stir in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth she couldn't quite name. 25 minutes later, the Mercedes purring like new, Victoria pressed a crisp $50 bill into David's grease-stained but reluctant hand. "Please, for the little one. You've absolutely saved my entire day." "Ma'am, it really wasn't necessary," David protested, but Victoria's grateful smile was so genuine that he found himself accepting the money. "Just glad we could help." That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her small bed, clutching Mr. Hoppy and dreaming whatever 6-year-olds dream about, David stared at the $50 bill on their tiny kitchen table. It would buy groceries for an entire week, maybe even a small treat for Emma. He had absolutely no idea that his simple act of kindness had just changed everything forever. 3 weeks later, on a dreary Tuesday morning that seemed designed to crush spirits, David's carefully constructed world came crashing down around him like a house of cards in a windstorm. Mr. Peterson, the gruff but fair owner of Peterson's auto shop where David had worked faithfully for 6 years, stood uncomfortably in the doorway of the tiny 2-bedroom apartment David shared with Emma. His weathered face bore the expression of a man delivering news he desperately wished he didn't have to share. "I'm real sorry, David. You've been one of my best mechanics, and you know I think the world of you and little Emma," Peterson said, his voice heavy with genuine regret. "But the corporate office made the decision over my head. They're closing down all the smaller locations and consolidating operations at the big facility downtown. Your last paycheck will cover you through this Friday, and I'll give you the best reference letter you've ever seen, but that's all I can do." After Peterson left, his work boots echoing sadly down the narrow hallway, David sat heavily on their threadbare couch that had come from a garage sale 3 years ago. He buried his face in his hands, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The rent was due in exactly 10 days. $800 he simply didn't have, and no immediate prospect of earning. Emma's kindergarten registration fee was already 2 weeks overdue, and the school had sent a stern reminder notice. The refrigerator hummed mockingly in the background, nearly empty except for a jar of peanut butter, half a loaf of bread, and some wilted lettuce that had seen better days. "Daddy?" Emma's small voice came from behind him as she emerged from her bedroom, dragging her feet in the way children do when they sense something is terribly wrong. She was clutching Mr. Hoppy against her chest and wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with faded pink unicorns that Sarah had bought her 4th birthday, back when their little family was still intact. "Are you crying? You look like you were crying." David quickly wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, forcing what he hoped was a reassuring smile onto his face. "Just tired, baby girl. Daddy's just really tired. But everything's going to be okay. I promise you that." But as he tucked Emma into her small bed that night, reading her favorite story about a brave little rabbit who went on adventures, David wasn't sure how he'd possibly keep that promise. His resume was painfully thin: high school diploma, 6 years at Peterson's auto shop, and 3 years of single parenthood after Sarah left them for her college boyfriend when Emma was barely 3 years old. The memory of that day still stung, coming home from work to find half their belongings gone and a note on the kitchen table explaining that Sarah needed to find herself and couldn't handle the responsibilities of marriage and motherhood. The next morning brought even more devastating news, delivered in the form of an official-looking letter shoved under their door. David's hands trembled as he read the typed words. "Notice to tenants. Due to rising property values and maintenance costs, rent will increase from $800 to $1,200 and $200 per month, effective beginning next month. This increase is within legal limits under current rent control ordinances. Please confirm your intention to remain at the new rental rate within 10 business days." David read the letter 3 times, hoping somehow the numbers would change. Even if he managed to find another job immediately, how could he possibly afford a 50% increase in their housing costs? His mind raced through possibilities: moving to a cheaper neighborhood, finding a roommate, working 2 jobs. But every option seemed to lead to the same frightening conclusion. "Daddy, I drew you a picture." Emma bounded into the small kitchen with the boundless energy that only 6-year-olds possess, holding up a crayon drawing of a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it. The artwork was surprisingly detailed for a child her age: him in his work clothes, her with pigtails, and surprisingly, a third figure with long flowing hair. "This is beautiful, sweetheart. Who's that third person there?" "That's the pretty lady from the car, the one with the nice smile. I hope we see her again sometime. She seemed lonely, like she needed friends." David forced a smile, though his heart was breaking into smaller pieces with each passing moment. In less than 2 weeks, they might very well be homeless, living in their old pickup truck or worse. The pretty lady with the expensive Mercedes lived in a completely different universe, one where flat tires were the worst problems you could possibly face. Meanwhile, 30 miles across town in her luxurious penthouse office that occupied the entire 40th floor of Sterling Enterprises Tower, Victoria Sterling stood at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city below. She couldn't shake the memory of the gentle man and his precious daughter, who had helped her without expecting anything in return, who had treated her like a regular person instead of a walking bank account. She had been researching various community outreach programs for the Sterling Foundation, looking for ways to make a meaningful impact beyond writing checks to faceless charities. Perhaps it was time to take a much more personal, hands-on approach to helping people. A decision was slowly forming in her brilliant mind, one that would change 3 lives in ways none of them could possibly imagine. Victoria Sterling's private investigator, James Morrison, was the kind of man who could find out anything about anyone without them ever knowing they were being watched. He laid the thick manila file on her polished mahogany desk with the practiced discretion that came from 20 years of handling sensitive information for wealthy clients who valued their privacy above all else. David Robert Matthews, age 33, born October 15th in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Morrison began in his professional monotone. Recently unemployed automotive mechanic, worked 6 years at Peterson's Auto Shop until corporate closure last week. Daughter Emma Rose Matthews, age 6, born March 22nd. Wife Sarah Elizabeth Matthews abandoned the family 3 years ago. Divorced finalized 2 years ago. No contact or child support since departure. Victoria studied the surveillance photographs spread across her desk like pieces of a puzzle she was trying to solve. David at the neighborhood grocery store on Elm Street, carefully counting coupons and comparing prices on generic brands. Emma at the small playground behind their apartment building, wearing shoes that were clearly at least 1 size too small, her jeans hemmed with what looked like duct tape, her chest tightened with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to experience. Genuine empathy mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify. Current living situation and financial status? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Month-to-month rental agreement on East Elm Street, apartment 2B. Landlord just issued notice of rent increase from $800 to $1,200 monthly, based on his banking records and credit report. Morrison paused, consulting his notes. He's got maybe 2 weeks before eviction proceedings begin. Checking account balance as of yesterday, $143. No savings account, no investments, no family financial support system. That evening, Victoria drove her midnight blue BMW through neighborhoods she'd never had reason to visit before. The contrast was striking and sobering. Chain-link fences instead of manicured hedges, cracked driveways instead of circular brick drives, and houses that had clearly seen better decades instead of the pristine estates she was accustomed to. David's building was a converted duplex with peeling white paint and a broken mailbox held together with electrical tape. Victoria parked across the street, feeling like an intruder in this world of genuine struggle and authentic relationships. Through the thin curtains of their front window, she could see them at their small kitchen table. David was helping Emma with what appeared to be homework, his face patient and attentive despite the obvious stress lines around his tired eyes. A single lamp provided their only illumination, probably an attempt to keep their electricity bill as low as possible. Victoria's childhood had been a series of prestigious boarding schools, private tutors and nannies who were paid to care. Her father, William Sterling, had built a real estate fortune worth hundreds of millions, but he had also built impenetrable walls around his heart after Victoria's mother died when she was 7. She had learned early that money could buy absolutely anything, except the kind of warmth and genuine connection she was witnessing between David and his daughter through that modest window. The next morning, Victoria made a phone call that would have shocked her business associates and board members. "Mrs. Henderson? This is Victoria Sterling from Sterling Enterprises. I understand you manage several rental properties on the east side of town. I'd like to purchase the building at 847 East Elm Street immediately. Today, if the paperwork can be arranged." By noon, she owned David's building through a subsidiary company. By evening, she had developed a comprehensive plan that would test whether kindness could truly be repaid without destroying the very innocence that made it so beautiful and rare. David was reading Emma her favorite bedtime story about the adventures of a brave little mouse when an unexpected knock interrupted their nightly routine. A well-dressed professional woman in her 50s stood at their door, holding an official-looking clipboard and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. "Mr. Matthews, my name is Janet Crawford, and I represent Sterling Property Management. We've recently acquired this building, and I'm here to inform you of some changes to your lease agreement." David's heart sank, expecting more bad news about rent increases or eviction notices. "The previous rent increase notice has been canceled completely," Crawford continued, "and we're actually implementing a neighborhood improvement initiative that will reduce your monthly rent to $500. The reduction is effective immediately and guaranteed for the next 2 years. David stared at her in stunned silence, certain he had misheard or was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. After Crawford left, Emma tugged persistently on his shirt sleeve. "Daddy, why are you crying happy tears? Did something really good happen?" He knelt down, wrapping his arms around his daughter and holding her tight against his chest. Maybe miracles really did happen to people like them after all. But deep in his mechanic's mind, trained to look for problems and connections, a tiny voice whispered that coincidences this convenient rarely happen by accident. 2 days later, another miracle arrived in the form of an unexpected phone call that rang just as David was making Emma's breakfast with the last of their peanut butter. "David Matthews, this is Helen Rodriguez from Rodriguez Construction Company. We heard through the grapevine that you're an experienced mechanic looking for work. We maintain a fleet of about 30 trucks and heavy equipment, and we need someone reliable to keep them running. Would you be interested in discussing a position?" The job paid $2,100 a month, more than David had ever earned in his entire working life. It also included basic health insurance for both him and Emma, something that had kept him awake countless nights worrying about what would happen if either of them got seriously sick or injured. As he hung up the phone, his hands were actually shaking with relief and disbelief. In the span of one remarkable week, he had gone from facing complete homelessness and financial ruin to having more stability and hope than he'd experienced since Sarah walked out on their family. But David Matthews had always been observant and analytical, traits that made him an excellent mechanic and a naturally cautious person. Something about the timing felt almost too perfect to be purely coincidental. That afternoon, while Emma played happily on the swing set at the small neighborhood park, her laughter ringing through the crisp autumn air, David noticed the sleek black sedan parked across the street from the playground. It was the same car he'd glimpsed near the grocery store 3 days ago, and outside Emma's elementary school yesterday morning, when he casually mentioned his recent good fortune with the rent reduction to Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor who had lived in the building for 15 years. She shared something that made his suspicions crystallize into certainty. "That's very strange, dear," she said, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "Sterling Property Management has owned 3 buildings on this block for at least 5 years, but they've never once reduced anyone's rent. In fact, poor old Mr. Chen in Building 843 got evicted just last month when he couldn't manage the increase from $750 to $1,100. Made me so sad to see him loading his furniture into his grandson's pickup truck." David's analytical mechanic mind started connecting dots with the same systematic approach he used to diagnose engine problems. The timeline was too convenient, the sequence of events too perfectly orchestrated, the job offer arriving exactly when he needed it most, the rent reduction coming immediately after the increase notice. Someone with significant resources and influence was systematically fixing his life, and he had a growing suspicion about who that someone might be. That evening, as they shared a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, a feast by their recent standards, Emma was unusually thoughtful and talkative. "Daddy, I keep thinking about the pretty lady from the car with the flat tire. Do you think she's lonely?" When she smiled at us, her eyes looked sad, like she was pretending to be happy. David studied his daughter's innocent but perceptive face. Emma had always possessed an emotional intelligence that amazed him, a gift she'd inherited from her mother, along with those striking blue eyes and natural empathy. "Why do you think she might be lonely, sweetheart?" She kept looking at us like she wanted to stay and talk longer, like when I watch other kids at school playing with their mommies and daddies together, and I wish I could have that too, but different somehow. That night, after Emma was peacefully asleep, David sat at his second-hand laptop computer, a purchase from the previous year, when their financial situation had been slightly more stable. He typed Victoria Sterling into the search engine, not entirely sure what he expected to find. The results made his blood run cold and his heart rate accelerate. Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Enterprises, net worth estimated at $47 million, renowned philanthropist and art gallery owner, recently featured in Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 Philanthropists to Watch, daughter of real estate mogul William Sterling. The pretty lady with the broken-down Mercedes wasn't just wealthy, she was one of the richest and most influential people in the entire state. David leaned back in his desk chair, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with mechanical precision. The private investigator he'd spotted following them, the mysteriously convenient job offer from a construction company that somehow knew he was unemployed, the rent reduction that defied all logic and precedent. Victoria Sterling wasn't simply some grateful motorist he'd helped. She was systematically and methodically reconstructing his entire life from behind the scenes. But the question that kept him awake until dawn was simple and terrifying. What did she want in return for all this orchestrated generosity? The next morning brought Emma's 7th birthday, a milestone David had been dreading financially but determined to make special despite their limitations. He had managed to save enough money over the past 2 months for a small chocolate cake from the neighborhood bakery and a used bicycle he'd discovered at a garage sale, bright pink with colorful streamers attached to the handlebars and a bell that chimed when you pressed the button. As he watched Emma's face completely transform with pure joy, spinning in excited circles around their small living room while still wearing her pajamas, David's heart swelled with the kind of bittersweet happiness that comes from giving everything you have to someone you love more than life itself. "It's the most beautiful, most perfect bicycle in the whole entire world, Daddy," she exclaimed, running her small hands along the frame as if it were made of precious metals instead of second-hand steel. A firm knock at their front door interrupted their private celebration. David opened it to find a professional delivery man in a crisp uniform, struggling to maneuver an enormous wrapped box through their narrow doorway. "David Matthews? Special birthday delivery for Miss Emma Matthews." The return address, printed in elegant gold lettering, read, Sterling Enterprises. David's jaw tightened as he signed for the package, his suspicions now confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt. Inside the beautifully wrapped box was a complete professional art set that belonged in a high-end specialty store rather than their modest apartment. Premium colored pencils in every conceivable shade, professional-grade watercolors, brushes of various sizes, and a leather-bound sketchbook with Emma's name embossed in gold on the cover. The accompanying card was written in elegant handwriting that matched the sophisticated woman he remembered. "For a budding artist with unlimited potential. Happy birthday, Emma. A friend who believes in you." Emma gasped with the kind of wonder usually reserved for Christmas morning, running her fingers reverently over the pristine art supplies. "Daddy, these are exactly like the ones they display in the fancy art store downtown, behind the glass case." David's protective instincts flared into something resembling controlled anger. Victoria Sterling was crossing clearly established boundaries now. This wasn't simple charity or gratitude. This was calculated manipulation designed to insert herself into their lives. Did she honestly think she could purchase her way into their family with expensive gifts and financial interventions? That afternoon, while Emma took her customary nap, exhausted from birthday excitement, David drove across town to Sterling Enterprises Tower. The building was a monument to wealth and corporate power, 40 floors of glass and chrome reaching toward the sky like a gleaming finger pointing at heaven itself. The receptionist, polished and professional in the way that expensive employees always are, informed him with practiced courtesy that Ms. Sterling was conducting important board meetings all afternoon and would not be available until the following week. "Please tell her that David Matthews is here and needs to speak with her immediately," he said with quiet determination. "She'll understand exactly who I am and why I'm here." 20 minutes later, Victoria Sterling emerged from the executive elevator, looking even more stunning and sophisticated than he remembered. But now David could see past her carefully constructed facade to the calculation and loneliness behind her warm smile. "David, what a wonderful and unexpected surprise. I hope Emma loved her birthday present. I wasn't sure what a 7-year-old might enjoy. We need to talk somewhere private, right now." Victoria's penthouse office was a masterpiece of interior design and conspicuous wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city, original artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses, and furniture that David was certain cost more than his entire annual salary. She gestured gracefully to a leather chair positioned across from her imposing mahogany desk. "I know exactly what you've been doing," David said without any preliminary small talk. "The job at Rodriguez Construction, the mysterious rent reduction, the expensive birthday gifts. I want to know why you're doing this, and I want it to stop immediately." Victoria's professional composure never wavered, but David caught a flicker of something vulnerable in her green eyes. "I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting." "Victoria, I may not have attended college or business school, but I'm definitely not stupid," he replied, his voice steady but firm. "A unemployed mechanic doesn't go from jobless to employed in 24 hours unless someone with influence makes strategic phone calls. Property management companies don't reduce rent out of pure kindness, especially when they're raising it for every other tenant. And wealthy strangers don't send expensive gifts to children they've met exactly once." For a long moment that stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross first, they stared at each other across her pristine desk. Finally, Victoria's carefully maintained mask slipped just enough to reveal the person beneath. "You're absolutely right," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been helping you and Emma. I want to know why. Victoria stood gracefully, walking to the enormous window that framed the city like a living photograph. When she turned back to face him, David saw something raw and desperately vulnerable in her expression that made his anger waver slightly. Because when I watched you with Emma in that parking lot, I witnessed something I've never had in my entire life, and I suppose I wanted to find a way to be part of something that beautiful and real. Victoria's confession hung in the air between them like a fragile bridge that could collapse with the wrong word. David studied her face intently, seeing past the carefully constructed wealthy facade to something much deeper and more painful, a loneliness that all the money in the world couldn't cure or even touch. You can't buy your way into people's lives, Victoria. That's not how genuine relationships work. I'm not trying to buy anything. The words came out sharper and more desperate than she had intended, revealing cracks in her professional composure. Do you have any idea what it's like to have absolutely everything money can provide but still lack the one thing that actually matters? I've had wealth and privilege my entire life, David. I've never had a real family or people who cared about me as a person rather than a bank account. David's expression softened slightly, though his guard remained up. So you decided to play fairy godmother to mine? Victoria laughed, but the sound held no humor whatsoever, only bitter self-recognition. My father taught me from a very young age that every human relationship is fundamentally transactional, that everyone wants something from you eventually. You and Emma were the first people I'd encountered in years who helped me without wanting anything in return, without even knowing who I was or what I could do for you. And now you're systematically making sure that I owe you everything. No! Victoria moved toward him, her professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. I wanted to help because watching Emma hug you in that parking lot, seeing how completely she trusts you, how safe and loved she feels in your presence, I realized that I have never felt that way about another human being, not once in 28 years of living. David saw genuine tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, and despite his anger and suspicion, his natural protective instincts began to override his caution. Victoria. My mother died when I was 7 years old, she continued, her voice becoming smaller and more vulnerable with each word. Breast cancer. My father couldn't handle the grief, so he sent me away to boarding school when I turned 8. I've been emotionally alone my entire life, David, surrounded by employees and business associates and people who want favors, but completely alone when it comes to genuine human connection. Victoria walked back to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass as if trying to touch the world beyond her isolation. When James, my investigator, told me that you might lose Emma, that you might both end up homeless and living in your truck, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. The thought of that precious little girl sleeping in a car because I had the power to prevent it, but chose not to act. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions and the weight of revelations that changed everything. Finally, David spoke, his voice quiet but firm. The job at Rodriguez Construction, the rent reduction, I need you to undo all of it immediately. Victoria's face went completely white as if he had physically struck her. David, please, you don't understand what you're asking. Without help, you and Emma will lose everything again within weeks. You'll be back to facing eviction and homelessness. Then that's my choice to make, not yours. Emma and I don't want or need charity, especially charity that comes with strings attached. It's not charity. Victoria's voice broke completely and tears began streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. It's me trying desperately to figure out how to care about other people. I don't know how to do this, David. I don't know how to have genuine friends or be part of a real family. All I know is business transactions and board meetings and charity galas where everyone smiles beautifully, but no one means a single word they say. David stood to leave, but Victoria's next words stopped him before he reached the door. Emma asked me if I was lonely that day in the parking lot. A 6-year-old child saw through me in 5 minutes and recognized something that every adult in my life has missed or chosen to ignore, that I'm completely and utterly alone in this world. David turned back to see Victoria crying openly now, her perfectly applied makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks, her professional facade completely abandoned. Give me a chance, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Not to fix your life with money or influence, but to learn how to be the kind of person who might actually be worthy of knowing you and Emma. Please, David, teach me how to be part of something real. Outside Victoria's office windows, storm clouds were gathering over the city skyline, and David realized that his simple act of kindness in a parking lot 3 weeks ago had unleashed forces that none of them knew how to control or predict. The real story of their intertwined lives was just beginning. and the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. David drove home in silence, Victoria's tearful confession echoing in his mind. When he arrived at their apartment, Emma was at the kitchen table carefully drawing with her new art supplies. She looked up with those perceptive blue eyes that seemed to see straight through adult complications. "Daddy, you look sad. Did something bad happen?" David sat beside her, watching as she colored a picture of 3 people holding hands. "Emma, what would you think if we had to give back some presents that someone gave us?" Emma studied her drawing thoughtfully, like when Tommy at school had to give back the toy he took from Sarah's desk. Something like that. "Well," Emma said, choosing her words carefully like the wise little soul she was, "if someone gives you something because they want to trick you or make you do something you don't want to do, then you should probably give it back. But if they give it to you because their heart is sad and they just want to be friends, maybe that's different." David stared at his daughter, amazed once again by her intuitive understanding of human nature. "The pretty lady with the car, Victoria, she seemed really lonely, Daddy. When she looked at us, it was like she was hungry, but not for food, for something else." That evening, David made a decision that surprised even himself. He called Victoria's office. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began when she answered. "Emma and I don't want charity, but maybe we could try friendship instead." Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "What does that mean?" she asked carefully. "It means you stop trying to fix our lives with money. And it means if you want to spend time with us, you ask like a normal person instead of orchestrating elaborate schemes." There was a long pause. "I don't know how to be a normal person, David. I've never learned." "Then maybe it's time you did." 2 days later, Victoria knocked on their door at 6 p.m., holding a grocery bag and looking more nervous than David had ever seen her. She was dressed simply, jeans and a sweater, though David suspected they probably cost more than his monthly salary. "I brought ingredients for dinner," she said hesitantly. "I thought maybe I could cook for you and Emma, if that's okay." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "You can cook? Can you teach me?" As Victoria fumbled her way through making spaghetti and meatballs, clearly out of her element in the small kitchen, David watched her interact with Emma. There was something beautiful and heartbreaking about seeing this powerful businesswoman get flour in her hair, while a 6-year-old patiently explained the proper way to roll meatballs. "Like this, Victoria," Emma demonstrated. "Daddy taught me you have to be gentle but firm." "I think I'm better at the firm part than the gentle part," Victoria admitted, laughing as her meatball fell apart in her hands. For the first time since they'd met, David saw Victoria's mask completely down. She wasn't the polished CEO or the lonely millionaire. She was just a woman trying to learn how to be part of something real. That night after Emma had gone to bed, David and Victoria sat on his small couch talking quietly. "Thank you," Victoria said simply, "for giving me a chance to do this the right way. We're not a charity case, Victoria, and we're not a project for you to fix." "I know," she said, meeting his eyes. "That's what makes this so terrifying. I don't know how to care about people without trying to control the situation." David studied her face in the dim lamplight. "Maybe that's something you can learn too." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, and inside their small apartment, 3 very different people began the delicate process of becoming a family. Over the next month, Victoria became a regular presence in their lives, but in a way that felt organic, rather than orchestrated. She would stop by after work with groceries, and they would cook dinner together. She learned to braid Emma's hair for school and helped with homework at their small kitchen table. Slowly, carefully, she was learning to be part of their world without trying to remake it. But David could see the struggle in her eyes. Victoria was used to solving problems with money and influence. Learning to simply be present, to offer comfort instead of solutions, went against every instinct she'd developed in 28 years of wealth and power. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in November. Emma had been quiet all day, and during dinner, she finally spoke up. "There's a daddy-daughter dance at school next week," she said, not looking up from her plate. "But I don't think we should go." "Why not, sweetheart?" David asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because you'll have to buy a dress. And dresses cost money and you'll worry about it all week." David's heart broke a little. His 6-year-old daughter was already learning to limit her dreams based on their financial reality. Victoria, who had been quietly eating her spaghetti, set down her fork. "Emma, would you like to go dress shopping with me this weekend? Just us girls?" Emma's eyes widened. "Really? But Daddy said we can't take money from you anymore." Victoria looked at David, and he saw something in her expression that made him nod slightly. This wouldn't be me giving you money, Victoria said carefully. This would be me asking if I could take my friend Emma shopping, because I've never had a little girl to shop with and it would make me really happy. Emma looked between them, her 6-year-old mind working through the complexities of adult relationships. Would it make you happy, Victoria? Really happy? Really, truly happy, Victoria confirmed. That Saturday, David watched from the doorway as Victoria helped Emma try on dresses at the department store. Victoria's face was radiant with joy as Emma twirled in a blue dress with sparkles on the skirt. It was the first time David had seen Victoria look genuinely, completely happy. "Daddy, look, I'm a princess," Emma called out, spinning until the dress flared around her. "You're the most beautiful princess I've ever seen," David replied, and he meant it. But it was Victoria's expression that caught his attention. She was watching Emma with such pure love and wonder that David felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't about money or control or even loneliness. Victoria genuinely loved his daughter. That night, after Emma had modeled her new dress for Mr. Hoppy and every stuffed animal in her room, she climbed into David's lap on the couch. "Daddy, I think Victoria loves us," she said matter-of-factly. "What makes you say that?" "Because when she looks at us, her eyes get all soft and happy, like how you look at me when you think I'm not watching." David realized his daughter was right. Victoria Sterling, one of the most powerful women in the state, had fallen in love with their little family. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The daddy-daughter dance was magical. Emma glided across the school gymnasium floor in her sparkling blue dress, her hand in David's, her face glowing with pure happiness. Victoria had volunteered to help with decorations, and David spotted her in the corner, hanging streamers and looking more content than he'd ever seen her. Later, as they drove home with a sleepy Emma in the back seat, Victoria riding alongside them in her own car, David made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop being afraid of what Victoria's presence in their lives might mean, and start thinking about what it could become. December brought the first real test of their fragile new dynamic. Victoria's father, William Sterling, announced he was coming to town for the holidays, something that hadn't happened in 5 years. Victoria's carefully constructed calm began to crack almost immediately. "He wants to meet at the club for dinner," she told David over coffee while Emma was at school. "He says he has concerns about how I've been spending my time lately." David had heard enough about William Sterling to know this wasn't going to be a pleasant family reunion. The man had built his fortune by being ruthless in business, and had apparently applied the same approach to raising his daughter. "Do you want us to stay away while he's here?" David asked, though the thought of abandoning Victoria when she needed support felt wrong. "No," Victoria said quickly, then paused. "Actually, I was wondering, would you consider meeting him? Both of you?" David could see the fear in her eyes. Victoria Sterling, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, was terrified of her own father. "If that's what you want, then yes." The dinner was held at the exclusive Riverside Country Club, where David felt completely out of place in his best shirt and tie. William Sterling was exactly what David had expected. Tall, imposing, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to calculate the monetary value of everything they looked at. "So you're the mechanic," William said, shaking David's hand with just enough pressure to establish dominance. "And this must be the child Victoria has become so fond of." Emma, wearing her best dress and holding Mr. Hoppy, because Victoria had insisted he should come too, looked up at William with her usual directness. "Are you Victoria's daddy?" she asked. "I am. She talks about you sometimes. She gets sad when she does." The silence that followed was deafening. William Sterling looked like he'd been slapped, while Victoria's face went pale. Throughout dinner, David watched William systematically try to undermine Victoria's confidence. Every decision she'd made, every aspect of her business, every choice in her personal life was subtly criticized or questioned. But something had changed in Victoria over the past few months. Instead of shrinking under her father's disapproval, she sat straighter. When William suggested she was wasting time on charity cases, Victoria's voice was steady and firm. "David and Emma aren't charity cases, Father. They're my family." The word hung in the air like a declaration of war. William's eyes narrowed. "Family? Victoria, you can't seriously believe that this arrangement is sustainable. What happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize you're playing house with people who have nothing to offer you?" David started to stand, but Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him. "With respect, Father, you're wrong. David and Emma have given me something I never had growing up. Unconditional love. They care about me as a person, not as a bank account or a business asset. And when they need money for the child's college, when there's a medical emergency, when reality sets in, they'll take everything you give them and then disappear when someone better comes along. Mark my words. Emma, who had been quietly coloring on her placemat, looked up suddenly. That's not true, she said in her clear 6-year-old voice. We loved Victoria before we even knew she had money. We love her because she makes really good spaghetti and she braids my hair and she reads stories with different voices for all the characters. She paused, then added with devastating simplicity, Don't you love Victoria just because she's Victoria? William Sterling had no answer for that question. After dinner, as they walked to their cars, Victoria was quiet. Finally, she spoke. I need to ask you something, David, and I need you to be completely honest. David waited. Are you and Emma with me because of what I can provide? The security, the opportunities, the lifestyle? David stopped walking and turned to face her. In the light from the parking lot lamps, he could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear that her father's words might be true. Victoria, do you remember what Emma drew the day after we met you? 3 people holding hands in front of a house? Victoria nodded. She drew that before she knew you had money, before any of the help with rent or jobs or anything else. She drew it because even at 6 years old she recognized something good in you, something worth keeping. He reached out and took her hand. We're not here for your money, Victoria. We're here because somewhere along the way you stopped being the woman who helped us with a flat tire and became the woman we can't imagine living without. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since David had known her, they were tears of happiness rather than loneliness. Behind them, Emma was already planning their Christmas celebration, chattering about cookies and decorations and making sure Victoria knew she was invited to everything. The healing had begun. Christmas morning brought a surprise that none of them had expected. Victoria arrived at their apartment at 7 a.m., looking nervous and carrying a small wrapped box that clearly wasn't meant for Emma. I have something I need to give you, she said to David. But first, there's something I need to tell you both. They gathered in the living room, Emma still in her pajamas and clutching Mr. Hoppy surrounded by the modest pile of presents they'd placed under their small artificial tree. I've made a decision about my father and the family business, Victoria began, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. I'm stepping back from Sterling Enterprises. Not completely, but I'm delegating most of the day-to-day operations so I can focus on what actually matters to me. David felt his stomach drop. Victoria, you don't need to change your entire life for us. I'm not doing it for you, she said, smiling. I'm doing it for me. For the first time in my adult life, I know what I want. I want to wake up in the morning looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. I want to help Emma with her homework and teach her how to paint with watercolors. I want to cook dinner with you and argue about whether the meatballs are too big or too small. She paused, taking a deep breath. I want to build something real instead of just managing something profitable. Emma, who had been listening with the serious expression she wore when adults were discussing important things, suddenly brightened. Does that mean you'll have more time for tea parties? All the tea parties you want, Victoria promised, laughing. Then she turned to David and held out the small wrap box. This is for you. But before you open it, I need you to know that I'm not trying to buy anything or fix anything. I'm just trying to say something I don't have words for. David opened the box carefully. Inside was a simple silver locket on a chain. When he opened it, he found a tiny photograph, the 3 of them at Emma's school carnival the week before, laughing as Emma tried to win a goldfish at the ring toss game. When did you take this? I didn't. Mrs. Rodriguez from your school took it and gave me a copy. She said it was the happiest she'd ever seen any of you look. David stared at the photograph. They did look happy. Genuinely, completely happy, in a way he'd forgotten was possible. Victoria, he said quietly, I need to tell you something too. He set the locket down carefully and took her hands in his. I love you. Not because you've helped us, not because you've made our lives easier, but because you've made our lives fuller. You've made us a family. Emma clapped her hands together. Does this mean Victoria's going to be my mom now? David and Victoria looked at each other, both realizing that a 6-year-old had just asked the question they'd been dancing around for weeks. Would you like that, sweetheart? Victoria asked carefully. I would like that very, very much, Emma said solemnly. But only if you want to be my mom too. Being a mom is really important work. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she knelt down to Emma's level. I would be honored to be your mom, Emma, if that's okay with your daddy. David pulled them both into his arms, his own eyes wet with tears he wasn't ashamed to shed. It's more than okay. It's perfect. Later that morning, as they cooked breakfast together and Emma chattered about all the things she wanted to show Victoria how to do, you have to learn how to make pancakes shaped like butterflies, and how to build the best blanket forts, and how to tell when Mr. Hoppy is sad and needs extra hugs. David realized that his simple act of kindness in a parking lot had led to something he'd never dared to hope for. They were going to be a real family. But first, Victoria had one more surprise that would change everything they thought they knew about their future together. 3 months later, on a warm spring afternoon that felt like a new beginning, Victoria stood in their small living room with papers in her hand and an expression that was both nervous and excited. "I have a proposal for you both," she began, "but it's a big one, and I need you to promise to hear me out completely before you decide." David and Emma, who had been building a puzzle at the coffee table, looked up expectantly. "I want to buy us a house. Together. Not as me buying you a house, but as us choosing a home where we can build our life as a family." David opened his mouth to protest, but Victoria held up her hand. "Let me finish. I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I've talked to lawyers and financial advisors to make sure we do this right. I want to put the house in all our names. Yours, mine, and Emma's. Equal ownership. If anything happens to our relationship, if you decide you want me out of your lives, you keep the house. It would be truly yours." Emma looked confused. "Why would we want you out of our lives?" Victoria smiled, kneeling down to Emma's level. "We wouldn't want that, sweetheart. But sometimes adults need to make sure that everyone feels safe and secure before they make big decisions." David was quiet for a long moment, processing what Victoria was offering. It wasn't charity. It was partnership. It wasn't her trying to fix their lives. It was her trying to build a new life with them. "There's something else," Victoria continued. "I want to adopt Emma. Legally. Officially. With your permission, David. I want to be her mother in every way that matters." Emma's face lit up like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Really? Really, truly?" "Really, truly," Victoria confirmed. "If you want me to be." Emma launched herself into Victoria's arms. "Yes, yes, yes, yes. Can I call you Mom?" "I would love that more than anything in the world," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. David watched the two most important people in his life hold each other, and felt something settle in his chest that he'd been carrying for years without realizing it. The fear that he wasn't enough, that he couldn't provide everything Emma needed, that their small family was somehow incomplete. Victoria had never tried to replace him as Emma's father. Instead, she'd completed their family in a way he'd never known they needed. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes to the house, yes to the adoption, yes to all of it." That evening, they drove through neighborhoods looking at houses online had flagged as possibilities. Emma provided running commentary from the back seat about which houses looked friendly and which ones looked stuck up. "That one looks like it has good hiding spots for hide and seek," she declared about a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch. "And that one looks like it has room for a really big garden where we could grow vegetables," Victoria added, pointing to a house with a large backyard. David found himself imagining their lives in these spaces. Victoria teaching Emma to paint in a sunny kitchen, family movie nights in a living room big enough for a comfortable couch, Emma running through a backyard while they watched from a deck they'd built together. "There's one more thing I need to tell you both," Victoria said as they pulled into the driveway of a house that had somehow felt right the moment they saw it. "My father called yesterday. He wants to have dinner again." David felt his protective instincts flare, but Victoria continued quickly. "I told him that was fine, but this time we'd be hosting. At our new house once we find one. And I told him that if he wants to be part of my life, he needs to accept that you and Emma are part of my life too." "What did he say?" David asked. Victoria smiled. "He said he'd think about it, which for my father is actually progress." As they walked through the house they'd all fallen in love with, Emma claiming bedrooms and planning where her art supplies would go, Victoria measuring windows for curtains, David imagining the life they could build within these walls. David realized that the scared, desperate man who'd helped a stranger with a flat tire 6 months ago was gone. In his place was a man who was building something beautiful with the two people he loved most in the world. Tomorrow, they would make an offer on the house. Next month, Victoria's adoption of Emma would be finalized. And somehow, despite all the odds against them, they were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to be happy. 1 year later, David stood in the kitchen of their new home, watching through the window as Victoria and Emma worked together in the garden they'd planted in the spring. Emma, now 7.5, was carefully watering the tomato plants while Victoria showed her how to check for pests. Both of them had dirt under their fingernails and matching smiles on their faces. The house had become everything they'd dreamed it could be. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator and hallway walls. Victoria's business had evolved into something that allowed her to work from home 3 days a week. David had started his own small auto repair shop in their garage, serving their neighbors and building a reputation based on honest work and fair prices. Mr. Hoppy now had a place of honor on Emma's new bed, in a room painted lavender with white clouds that Victoria had spent 2 weekends helping her create. The adoption papers had been finalized 6 months ago. Victoria Sterling was now legally, officially, permanently Emma's mother. The day the judge signed the final decree, Emma had looked up at them both and said, "Does this mean we're a real family now?" "We were always a real family," Victoria had replied. "Now we're just a legal one too." William Sterling had indeed come to dinner at their new house. It had been awkward and tense, but he'd made an effort. When Emma had shown him her art room and explained how Victoria was teaching her about color theory and perspective, something in his expression had softened slightly. "She's a remarkable child," he'd told David later, while Victoria and Emma were in the kitchen making dessert. "She is," David had agreed. "And she has a remarkable mother now, too." William had nodded slowly. "Victoria seems different, happier. Love does that to people." That evening, as they tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at them both with those perceptive blue eyes that still saw straight through to the heart of things. "Daddy, do you remember when you helped Victoria with her car?" "Of course I do, sweetheart. Do you think she really needed help? Or do you think maybe she needed help with something else?" David and Victoria exchanged a look over Emma's head. Leave it to their daughter to see what they'd all missed. "I think," Victoria said carefully, "that sometimes when we think we need one kind of help, we actually need something completely different. Like how when I'm sad about missing my old mom, I think I need to be alone, but what I really need is hugs." "Exactly like that," David confirmed. After Emma was asleep, David and Victoria sat on their back porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Victoria's head was resting on David's shoulder, and he could feel her contentment in the way she breathed, slow and peaceful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help me that day?" she asked quietly. "No," David said without hesitation, "because I would have stopped. That's who I am. That's who my parents raised me to be, and it's who I want Emma to be too. And I would have needed help because I'd never learned to change a tire or ask for assistance or trust strangers or any of the things that normal people know how to do." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Victoria spoke again. "I used to think that love was about finding someone who needed what you could provide, someone whose problems you could solve. And now I think love is about finding someone who sees who you really are and chooses to build something beautiful with that person." David tightened his arms around her. "I love who you really are, Victoria Sterling." "I love who you really are too, David Matthews." From inside the house, they could hear Emma talking quietly to Mr. Hoppy, telling him about their plans for tomorrow, a trip to the farmer's market, followed by lunch at the park, followed by a family movie night. Their life wasn't perfect. They still worried about money sometimes, still disagreed about parenting decisions, still struggled with the normal challenges that every family faces. Victoria still had moments where her old instincts kicked in, and she tried to solve problems with money instead of presents. David still sometimes felt intimidated by her world of wealth and influence. But they were building something real together, a family based on choice rather than chance, on love rather than obligation, on the radical idea that 3 people from completely different worlds could create something beautiful if they were willing to be vulnerable and honest and brave. Outside their window, Emma's nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls of the home they'd chosen together. In the morning they would wake up and continue building their life, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. And it all started with a simple act of kindness on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when a man chose to help a stranger and discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as flat tires and unexpected second chances. Their story was just beginning. Single father janitor says something to mute girl and she whispers, unaware her powerful cold mother was watching and crying. "Before anything else, let's see how connected we really are. What's one thing you can see from your window right now?" The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Manhattan penthouse as Marcus Thompson pushed his cleaning cart down the pristine hallway. At 32, his weathered hands told the story of a man who'd fought for every dollar, every opportunity. The designer suits hanging in closets worth more than his annual salary reminded him daily of the chasm between his world and theirs. But none of that mattered when he saw her. Little Emma sat cross-legged in the corner of the vast living room, her blonde curls catching the light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. 6 years old and beautiful as an angel, she hadn't spoken a single word since the day she was born. The army of specialists, therapists, and doctors had all delivered the same verdict: physically capable, mentally sound, but locked in a silence that no one could break. Marcus had been cleaning these offices for 3 years, watching Emma grow from a toddler into this quiet little girl who seemed to understand everything but shared nothing. Today, she was arranging her wooden blocks with the same methodical precision she always displayed, creating perfect towers that defied her age. "Good morning, sunshine," Marcus said softly, the way he always did. The other staff had long since stopped trying to interact with the strange little girl, but something about Emma's bright blue eyes told him she was listening, always listening. He knelt down, pretending to dust the coffee table nearby. "You know, Emma, I had a daughter once. She would have been about your age now." His voice carried the weight of old pain, carefully controlled. "She used to build towers just like yours." Emma's small hands paused for just a moment, and Marcus felt his heart skip. In 3 years, he'd never seen her react to anything anyone said. "Her name was Lily," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I used to tell her that words weren't the only way to show love. Sometimes the most important things we have to say come from somewhere deeper than our voices." Emma turned her head slightly, those impossibly blue eyes meeting his for the first time ever. Marcus felt something electric pass between them, a connection that transcended the silence that had defined her existence. "You know what I think, Emma?" Marcus said, his voice warm with something that might have been hope. "I think you're just waiting for the right moment to share what's in that beautiful heart of yours." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Then so quietly that Marcus almost thought he'd imagined it, Emma's lips moved. "I love you." The words were barely a whisper, fragile as butterfly wings, but they shattered the silence that had surrounded Emma for 6 long years. Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes as he stared at this little girl who had just spoken her first words. Not to her mother, not to her doctors, but to him. What neither of them knew was that Victoria Ashford stood frozen in the doorway of her office, her phone dropping from nerveless fingers to crash against the marble floor. Victoria Ashford had built an empire worth $12 billion by the age of 27, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She pressed herself against the doorframe, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had finally unlocked her daughter's voice. Emma's first words. After 6 years of silence, specialists from around the world and more sleepless nights than she could count, her daughter had whispered, "I love you," to the janitor. Victoria's manicured hand flew to her mouth as tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years began to fall. She'd given Emma everything, the best schools, the finest toys, every opportunity money could buy. But she'd been so consumed with running Ashford Industries, with board meetings and hostile takeovers, that she'd missed the most important moments of her daughter's life. Marcus was still kneeling beside Emma, his expression a mixture of wonder and something that looked suspiciously like joy. "Did you just—" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Emma nodded solemnly, her small hand reaching out to touch his weathered cheek. "I love you," she repeated, stronger this time, each word clear and deliberate. Victoria felt her legs give way, and she sank against the wall, watching as her daughter, her silent, mysterious daughter, smiled for the first time in months. The smile wasn't directed at her mother's wealth, her influence, or any of the expensive gifts that filled Emma's room. It was for a man who made minimum-wage cleaning offices, who had somehow reached through 6 years of silence with nothing but kindness. "Why me, sweetheart?" Marcus asked gently, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why now?" Emma's answer came in that same whisper-soft voice, but every word cut through Victoria like a blade. "Because you see me. Mama sees work. You see Emma." The observation was devastating in its simplicity and truth. Victoria thought of all the times she'd been on conference calls during Emma's therapy sessions, all the bedtime stories that had been delegated to nannies, all the moments she'd chosen board reports over building blocks. Marcus seemed to sense they weren't alone. He glanced toward the doorway, his eyes widening as he spotted Victoria. For a moment, they stared at each other across the elegant room, the billionaire CEO in her designer suit, and the janitor who had just witnessed a miracle. "Mrs. Ashford," Marcus said quietly, rising to his feet. "I think you should know." But Victoria was already moving, crossing the room with quick, desperate steps. She knelt beside her daughter, her heart hammering as she reached out with trembling hands. "Emma, baby, can you Can you say something to Mama? Emma looked at her mother's tear-stained face, those blue eyes so much like Victoria's own, and for a moment, hope flickered in Victoria's chest. Then Emma turned back to Marcus, her small hand finding his. The silence stretched between mother and daughter, more profound now because Victoria knew Emma could break it. She simply chose not to. 24 hours later, Victoria stood in her corner office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline without seeing it. The city that had once represented her conquest now felt like a prison of her own making. Her assistant's voice droned through the intercom about quarterly projections, but all Victoria could hear were Emma's words echoing in her mind. You see work. You see Emma. The truth was a knife twisting in her chest. She'd fought so hard to build something meaningful, to create a legacy worthy of her daughter, that she'd forgotten the daughter herself. Emma's silence hadn't been a medical mystery, it had been a choice. A choice to remain voiceless in a world where her mother's voice dominated everything. Cancel my meetings, Victoria said suddenly, cutting off her assistant mid-sentence. Ma'am, you have the Henderson acquisition at 2, and the board meeting at 4. Cancel them all. Victoria was already reaching for her purse. Her mind made up. And get me Marcus Thompson's personnel file. I want to know everything. 30 minutes later, Victoria sat in her Mercedes outside a weathered apartment building in Queens, Marcus Thompson's file open on her lap. 32 years old, divorced 3 years ago. No children listed in his emergency contacts despite mentioning a daughter to Emma. The pieces of a broken life scattered across official documents and employment records. She found him on the 4th floor, his door marked with peeling numbers that spoke of dreams deferred and struggles endured. When he answered her knock, his expression shifted from surprise to something approaching wariness. Mrs. Ashford, I wasn't expecting. May I come in? Victoria's voice was softer than she'd ever used in a boardroom, uncertain in a way that felt foreign. I need to understand what happened today. Marcus stepped aside, and Victoria entered a world she'd never seen. Not poverty exactly, but the careful economy of someone who counted every dollar. The apartment was spotlessly clean, decorated with what looked like garage sale finds arranged with obvious care. She spoke to you, Victoria said without preamble. After 6 years of silence, she spoke to you. I need to know why. Marcus gestured to a worn but comfortable couch. Can I ask you something first? Mrs. Ashford? Victoria nodded, settling into the unfamiliar space. When's the last time you sat on the floor with Emma? Not watching her play while you worked, but actually playing with her. The question hit like a physical blow. Victoria opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. She couldn't remember. Board meetings, charity galas, acquisition dinners. She could recite her schedule from memory. But when had she last simply been Emma's mother? I see, Marcus said quietly, reading her expression. You want to know why she spoke to me? Because I listen when she doesn't speak. I see the way she arranges her blocks, the patterns she makes, the way she watches people. Your daughter isn't broken, Mrs. Ashford. She's just been waiting for someone to notice she was there. But she said she loves you, Victoria whispered, the words tearing at her throat. Her first words were about loving a stranger instead of her own mother. Marcus leaned forward, his expression gentle but firm. Mrs. Ashford, I lost my daughter 2 years ago. Car accident, she was 4. His voice caught, but he continued. Every day I come to work and see Emma, I see what I lost. So yes, I pay attention. I talk to her like she matters, like her silence is just another way of being whole. Victoria felt the room spin around her. All this time she'd thought Emma's silence was something to be fixed, cured, overcome. But Marcus saw it as something to be honored, understood, accepted. How do I get her back? Victoria asked, her voice breaking on the words she'd never imagined she'd say to a janitor in Queens. How do I get my daughter back? Marcus's answer wasn't what Victoria expected. Instead of advice, he asked a question that shattered every assumption she'd built her life around. Do you even know what Emma loves, Mrs. Ashford? Not what you think she should love, or what other 6-year-olds love. What makes Emma Emma? Victoria sat in stunned silence, scrolling through memories that suddenly felt hollow. Designer clothes Emma never seemed to wear. Expensive toys she rarely touched. Educational programs she endured rather than enjoyed. How had she become a stranger to her own daughter? I don't know, she admitted, the words barely audible. I don't know my own child. Marcus rose and moved to a bookshelf, pulling out a photo album Victoria hadn't noticed. May I show you something? He opened to a page filled with pictures of a little girl with dark hair and bright eyes, captured in moments of pure joy, finger painting. building sandcastles, chasing bubbles in a park. This was my Lily, Marcus said softly. I took these pictures in the 6 months before she died. You know what I learned? Children don't need perfect. They need present. Victoria studied the photos, seeing something in them that was absent from the professional portraits of Emma that lined her penthouse walls. These pictures captured a father who was fully engaged with his daughter, someone who saw wonder in finger paint and magic in soap bubbles. Emma watches you, Marcus continued. Every time you walk through that office, she tracks your movement. She's not angry at you, Mrs. Ashford. She's waiting for you to see her the way I saw Lily, the way I see Emma now. But she won't speak to me, Victoria protested. Even after today, she just looks at me and chooses silence. Because you're still trying to fix her instead of knowing her, Marcus said with a gentleness that somehow made the truth bearable. Emma's silence isn't a problem to be solved. It's a language you never learned to speak. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of truth so fundamental it changed everything. Teach me, she whispered. Please. I'll pay you anything, give you anything. Just teach me how to talk to my daughter. Marcus closed the photo album and looked at her with something approaching compassion. Mrs. Ashford, this isn't something money can buy. But if you're serious about wanting to know Emma, really know her, then we need to start with you understanding why she chose to speak to me. Tell me. Because I told her about Lily. I shared something real, something that hurt, something that mattered. Emma has been surrounded by people who want to study her, fix her, or impress you through her. I just wanted to connect with her. Victoria felt the walls she'd built around her heart begin to crack. What do I share with a 6-year-old that isn't about business or money or success? You start with truth, Marcus said simply. You tell her about the day she was born, about how scared you were when she didn't cry right away, about how you used to hold her all night when she was a baby, afraid to put her down because she seemed too precious to be real. Tears Victoria had held back for years began to fall in earnest. How do you know that? Because that's what love looks like before it gets complicated by everything else. Marcus handed her a tissue from a box that had seen plenty of use. The question is, are you ready to be that vulnerable with your daughter? Victoria wiped her eyes, seeing her reflection in the window of Marcus's modest apartment. For the first time in years, she looked like a woman instead of a corporation. Yes, she said, meaning it more than any business deal she'd ever agreed to. I'm ready. The next morning, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She canceled all her meetings and went to Emma's school. Not for a parent-teacher conference or a charity fundraiser, but simply to pick up her daughter and spend the day together. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, looked surprised when Victoria appeared in the classroom doorway at noon. Mrs. Ashford? Is everything all right? Emma's not scheduled for early dismissal. I'd like to take my daughter out for the afternoon, Victoria said, her voice carrying none of its usual corporate authority. If that's possible. Emma looked up from her art project, those blue eyes wide with confusion. In 6 years, Victoria had never been the parent who showed up unexpectedly, who disrupted schedules for the sake of spontaneity. Of course, Mrs. Rodriguez said, though her expression suggested this was highly unusual. Emma, your mother is here to take you on an adventure. Emma gathered her things slowly, as if waiting for Victoria to remember an urgent phone call or an important meeting that would change their plans. But Victoria just stood there, patient in a way that felt foreign to both of them. They drove in silence through Manhattan, past the towering buildings that housed Victoria's empire, until they reached Central Park. Victoria parked the car and turned to face her daughter. Emma, she began, her voice uncertain in a way it never was in boardrooms. I want to tell you about the day you were born. Emma's hands stilled on her backpack zipper, those perceptive eyes fixed on her mother's face. I was terrified, Victoria continued, the words coming easier than she'd expected. Not of the business deals I might miss or the meetings I'd have to reschedule. I was terrified that I wouldn't be good enough for you, that I wouldn't know how to be your mama. Emma's expression shifted, something that might have been surprise flickering across her features. When you were born, you didn't cry right away. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. You just looked at me with these incredible blue eyes, and I knew my whole world had changed. I held you all night that first night, afraid to put you down because you seemed too perfect to be real. Victoria reached out slowly, giving Emma time to pull away if she wanted to. Instead, Emma leaned into her mother's touch, the first time she'd initiated physical contact in months. I got lost somewhere along the way, Victoria whispered, her voice thick with tears. I started trying to build a world worthy of you instead of just being present in the world we already had. And I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I made you feel invisible. Emma's lips parted, and for a moment Victoria held her breath. But instead of words, Emma did something she hadn't done since she was a toddler. She climbed into her mother's lap and wrapped her small arms around Victoria's neck. They sat together in the car, mother and daughter, while the city bustled around them. Victoria felt Emma's heartbeat against her chest and realized this was the first time in years she'd felt completely present in any moment. "Want to go feed the ducks?" Victoria asked eventually. Emma pulled back to look at her mother's face, searching for something. Then, slowly, she nodded. They spent the afternoon by the pond, and Victoria discovered things about her daughter she'd never known. Emma had names for all the ducks. She could skip stones with surprising accuracy for a 6-year-old. She preferred strawberry ice cream to chocolate, sunflowers to roses, and watching clouds to watching cartoons. As the sun began to set, Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve and pointed to a bench overlooking the water. "Want to sit together?" Victoria asked. Emma nodded and settled beside her mother, her small hand finding Victoria's. They watched the ducks glide across the water in comfortable silence, and Victoria realized that for the first time in years she wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or acquisition targets. Then Emma spoke, her voice still whisper-soft but clear as crystal. "Mama sad?" Victoria looked down at her daughter, seeing not the silent child who frustrated doctors and worried teachers, but the perceptive little girl who had been watching, understanding, waiting for her mother to be real. "I was sad," Victoria admitted, "but not anymore. Not when I'm with you." Emma squeezed her mother's hand and leaned against her side. "Emma loves Mama too." 6 weeks later, Victoria's office looked dramatically different. The sterile perfection had been replaced by something warmer, more human. Crayon drawings hung beside quarterly reports. A small reading corner had been carved out near the windows, and Emma's wooden blocks sat in a place of honor on the mahogany desk. Marcus knocked on the open door, pushing his cleaning cart with the same quiet dignity he'd always carried. But now, instead of being invisible help, he was a welcome part of their daily routine. "Good afternoon, ladies," he said, smiling as Emma looked up from the book Victoria was reading to her. "Marcus." Emma's voice, though still soft, carried genuine joy. In 6 weeks, her vocabulary had exploded. She spoke in full sentences now, asked endless questions, and filled the silence that had defined her for so long with laughter and wonder. "How was school today, sunshine?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair Victoria had placed specifically for these conversations. "We learned about butterflies," Emma said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Did you know they remember being caterpillars?" "Is that so?" Marcus glanced at Victoria, who was watching this exchange with something approaching awe. Even after weeks of progress, she was still amazed by her daughter's transformation. "Emma, why don't you tell Marcus about our weekend plans?" Victoria suggested. Emma practically bounced in her chair. "We're going to visit Marcus's mama in the hospital, and then we're having a picnic in the park, and Mama said we can invite anyone we want." Marcus's expression shifted, surprise and something deeper flickering across his features. "Your mama told you about visiting my mother?" "She tells me everything now," Emma said matter-of-factly. "About work and about feelings and about how she used to be scared to be my mama." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Marcus's approving nod made her embarrassment fade. "That's what good mamas do," Marcus said gently. "They share their hearts with their daughters." "Marcus," Victoria said. "Yeah?" Her voice carrying the weight of a decision she'd been building toward for weeks. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about presence versus presence." Marcus tilted his head, waiting. "I want to offer you a position," Victoria continued. "Not charity, not pity, a real job. I need someone to help me remember what matters. Someone to help me stay present in Emma's life while still running the company." "What kind of position?" Marcus asked carefully. "Family liaison," Victoria said, the title feeling right as she spoke it. "Someone who helps me balance being Emma's mother with being Victoria Ashford. Someone who reminds me when board meetings matter less than bedtime stories." Emma clapped her hands together. "Marcus would work with us every day?" "If he wants to," Victoria said, her eyes meeting Marcus's. "The salary would be substantial, enough to help with your mother's medical bills, enough to give you the kind of security you deserve." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. "Mrs. Ashford, I appreciate this more than you know, but I need to ask, are you offering me this job because you're grateful, or because you think Emma and I have formed some kind of attachment that requires management?" The question was direct, challenging, and exactly what Victoria had come to expect from the man who had opened her eyes to her daughter's true nature. "I'm offering you this job because you see people," Victoria said honestly. "You saw Emma when no one else did. You saw me drowning in my own success when I couldn't see it myself. And frankly, I need someone in my life who will call me out when I start losing sight of what matters again." "And what if Emma decides she doesn't want to talk anymore?" Marcus asked. "What if the pressure of this new dynamic changes things?" Emma looked between the two adults, then slid off her chair and walked over to Marcus. She placed her small hands on his knees and looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. "Marcus," she said in her soft, clear voice, "you helped Mama find me. Now we help each other find everything else." Marcus looked down at this remarkable little girl, then over at her mother, who was watching with tears in her eyes and hope written across her face. "Well," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I guess I'd better accept the job then. Someone needs to make sure you two don't take over the world while I'm not looking." Emma giggled and threw her arms around Marcus's neck, and Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced since Emma was born. The absolute certainty that her daughter was exactly where she was supposed to be. But as the three of them laughed together in the golden afternoon light streaming through the office windows, none of them noticed the figure watching from the building across the street, or the telephoto lens capturing every moment of their joy. Someone else had been watching Emma's transformation, and they had plans of their own. The photographs arrived on Victoria's desk on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier in an unmarked envelope. Her hands trembled as she spread them across the mahogany surface. Dozens of pictures capturing intimate moments over the past 6 weeks. Emma laughing in the park, Marcus reading to her in the office, Victoria and Emma feeding ducks by the pond. Someone had been watching them, documenting their every move. The accompanying note was brief and chilling. "Some families aren't meant to be happy. You have 48 hours to send the girl away, or everyone will learn the truth about Marcus Thompson. The choice is yours." Victoria's blood turned to ice. What truth? What could possibly justify this invasion of their newfound happiness? Her intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Thompson is here with Emma for story time." "Send them away," Victoria said automatically, then caught herself. "No, wait. Send them in." Emma burst through the door first, her face glowing with excitement. "Mama, we saw a butterfly garden on the way up. Can we plant one on the roof?" But Emma's enthusiasm faded when she saw her mother's pale face. With the intuition that had always set her apart, Emma moved closer to Victoria's desk, her eyes drawn to the scattered photographs. "Mama scared?" Emma asked softly. Marcus followed Emma's gaze, and his expression darkened as he recognized the images. "Mrs. Ashford, where did these come from?" Victoria quickly gathered the photos, but not before Marcus caught a glimpse of the threatening note. His face went ashen, and something that looked like guilt flickered in his eyes. "I need to speak with Marcus alone," Victoria said to Emma, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Why don't you go to the reading corner and pick out a book?" Emma hesitated, sensing the tension in the room, but eventually settled into her favorite spot by the window. "You know what this is about," Victoria said once Emma was out of earshot. "I can see it in your face." Marcus sank into the chair across from her desk, suddenly looking every one of his 32 years. "Mrs. Ashford, there are things about my past. Things I never told you because they didn't seem relevant anymore. Tell me now," Victoria demanded, her CEO voice returning despite her fear. Marcus glanced toward Emma, who was pretending to read but clearly listening to every word. "Not here. Not in front of her. Then we go somewhere else. Right now." 20 minutes later, they sat in Victoria's car in the parking garage beneath her building. Emma safely upstairs with Marcus's temporary replacement. The concrete walls felt like a fortress, but Victoria knew they offered no real protection from whoever was hunting them. 3 years ago, I wasn't a janitor," Marcus began, his voice heavy with shame. "I was Detective Marcus Thompson, NYPD. I had a good life, a beautiful wife, a daughter I adored." Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her. "Detective? Narcotics Division. I was working a case involving a drug trafficking ring that went all the way to the top of some very powerful families. Families with connections to politicians, judges, business people." Marcus's hands clenched on his knees. "I gathered evidence, built a case that would have brought down 20 major players. What happened? Someone leaked that I was getting close. They couldn't buy me, couldn't threaten me through normal channels, so they went after my family." Marcus's voice broke. "The car accident that killed Lily and hospitalized my wife Sarah, it wasn't an accident." Victoria's heart stopped. "Oh my God. I had a choice. Pursue the case and risk Sarah's life too, or disappear. Let Marcus Thompson, the detective, die and become someone invisible, someone safe. He looked up at Victoria with eyes full of anguish. I chose Sarah. I chose survival. I buried the evidence and became a ghost. But if you have evidence, had evidence, I destroyed it all to protect what was left of my family. Sarah recovered physically, but she couldn't handle what we'd lost. She divorced me, moved across the country, started over. And I became the janitor who nobody notices, nobody remembers. Victoria processed this revelation, pieces clicking into place. And now someone knows who you really were, which means they know I still represent a threat even without the evidence. Marcus met her eyes. Mrs. Ashford, being around me puts you and Emma in danger. Real danger. From somewhere in the shadows of the parking garage, a slow clap echoed off the concrete walls. Both Victoria and Marcus spun toward the sound, their hearts racing. A figure stepped into the pale fluorescent light. A woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with cold eyes and a smile that held no warmth. How touching, the woman said. A cop, a billionaire, and a mute child. What a lovely little family you've created. Victoria's hand moved instinctively toward her phone, but the woman held up a manicured finger. I wouldn't, she said conversationally. Security cameras in this garage have been experiencing technical difficulties for the past hour. No one knows we're here. Who are you? Victoria demanded, stepping protectively closer to Marcus. Someone who's been cleaning up Marcus's mess for 3 years, the woman replied. My name is Catherine Blackwood, and I represent certain interests that were very inconvenienced by Detective Thompson's investigation. Marcus's jaw tightened. I destroyed everything. There's nothing left. Oh, Marcus, Catherine said with mock sympathy. You really think we'd leave that to chance? You think we'd trust the word of a man who lost everything and had nothing left to lose? She pulled out a tablet and swiped to a series of documents. Copies of everything, stored in 3 separate locations. Insurance, you might say. And now that you've surfaced from your little hiding place, gotten attached to new people who matter to you, what do you want? Victoria interrupted, her voice steady despite her fear. Smart question from a smart woman, Catherine said approvingly. I want Detective Thompson to finish what he started, not the investigation. That ship has sailed. I want him to eliminate the evidence permanently. All of it. I told you I already, not destroyed, Marcus, eliminated. As in the people who have copies need to stop existing. Catherine's smile turned predatory. 3 targets, clean jobs, no questions asked. The parking garage fell silent except for the distant hum of ventilation systems. Victoria felt sick as the implications sank in. You want me to kill for you? Marcus said flatly. I want you to clean up your own mess, Catherine corrected. You put these people in danger with your investigation. Now you can save them by doing what needs to be done. And if I refuse? Catherine swiped to another screen on her tablet. Video footage of Emma playing in the butterfly garden that morning, laughing as she chased a monarch between the flowers. Such a beautiful child, Catherine said softly. So special. Did you know there are people who pay extraordinary amounts for children with unique qualities? Emma's particular gifts would make her very valuable to the right buyers. Victoria lunged forward, but Marcus caught her arm. Don't, he said quietly. That's what she wants. Smart man, Catherine said. Now you have 24 hours to decide. Kill 3 people who helped you investigate my clients 3 years ago, or lose the little girl who finally taught you how to love again. Those people are innocent, Marcus protested. They were just doing their jobs. And now they're loose ends, Catherine replied with a shrug. Loose ends that your new family will pay for if you don't tie them up. She tucked the tablet back into her purse and checked her watch. 24 hours, Marcus. I'll be in touch with details. Catherine turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Victoria? I know what you're thinking. All that money, all that power, surely you can protect your daughter. But you'd be amazed how easily accidents happen to even the most protected children. Ask Marcus. He knows. With that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Victoria and Marcus alone in the suffocating silence of the parking garage. Victoria turned to Marcus, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the gentle janitor who had unlocked her daughter's voice, but the broken detective who had lost everything and was about to lose it all again. We have to call the police, she said. And tell them what? That a woman we can't prove was here made threats we can't prove she made? Marcus shook his head. Catherine Blackwood doesn't exist in any database. These people have had 3 years to perfect their invisibility. Then we run. I have resources, connections. We can disappear. For how long? And what kind of life would that be for Emma? Marcus's voice was hollow with despair. She just learned to speak. Victoria. She just learned to trust. How do we take that away from her? Victoria felt tears burning her eyes as the impossible choice crystallized before them. Save 3 innocent people and lose Emma, or save Emma and become murderers. There has to be another way, she whispered. Marcus looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, lost too much. There's always another way, he said quietly. The question is whether we're strong enough to find it. But even as he spoke the words, Victoria could see the doubt in his expression, and somewhere above them, Emma was probably wondering why storytime had been canceled, why the adults in her life suddenly looked so frightened. Time was running out, and the shadows in the parking garage seemed to be closing in. That night, Victoria sat in Emma's bedroom watching her daughter sleep, memorizing every detail of her peaceful face. How could she explain to a 6-year-old that their newfound happiness was built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath them? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Meet me at the office, I have an idea." Victoria kissed Emma's forehead and slipped out, leaving detailed instructions with her night security team. If anything happened to her, they were to take Emma immediately to Victoria's sister in California and never look back. She found Marcus in her office, surrounded by papers and multiple laptops. His eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion, but there was something different in his expression, a determination she hadn't seen before. "Tell me you found something," Victoria said. "I found everything," Marcus replied, turning one of the laptops toward her. "Catherine Blackwood might not exist officially, but money leaves trails. Always." The screen showed a complex web of financial transactions, shell companies, and interconnected accounts. I spent the last 6 hours following every lead I could remember from my investigation. The people who killed my daughter, who destroyed my life, they're all connected to Meridian Holdings. "I've heard of them," Victoria said slowly. "International investment firm. Very exclusive clientele. Very criminal clientele," Marcus corrected. "Drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers, anyone with dirty money to clean. And guess who sits on their board of directors?" Victoria studied the screen, then felt her blood turn to ice. "Richard Ashford. But that's my ex-husband, Emma's father." "The plot thickens," Marcus said grimly. "Victoria, this isn't about my old investigation anymore. This is about Emma." "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled up another file. "Richard Ashford disappeared 2 years ago, right around the time my family was killed. Financial records show massive transfers from his personal accounts to Meridian Holdings just before he vanished. He stole from them," Victoria breathed. $50 million. And then he disappeared, leaving behind a wife with a $12 billion empire and a daughter with very special gifts. Marcus met her eyes. "Emma isn't just leverage to control me, Victoria. She's collateral for her father's debt." Victoria sank into a chair as the full scope of their situation became clear. "They've been watching her all along, waiting for the right moment. And I gave them that moment by getting close to your family, by making Emma matter to someone who knows their secrets." Marcus's voice was thick with guilt. "This is all my fault." "No," Victoria said firmly. "This is Richard's fault, and these criminals' fault, but not yours." She stood up, decision crystallizing in her mind. "How much evidence do you actually have?" "Enough to connect Richard to Meridian, Meridian to Catherine, and Catherine to the people who killed Lily, but not enough to prove any specific crimes." "What if we don't need to prove crimes?" Victoria asked. "What if we just need to apply the right pressure?" Marcus looked confused, but Victoria was already reaching for her phone. "Who are you calling?" "The FBI," Victoria said. "Not to report crimes we can't prove, but to report stolen money we can trace. $50 million in fraud across international borders. That gets federal attention very quickly." "Victoria, that will take months to investigate." "No, it won't." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because I'm about to make the biggest donation in FBI history to their financial crimes unit, with the specific request that they prioritize cases involving missing persons and stolen funds. Money talks, Marcus, and I'm about to make it scream." As she waited for the call to connect, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of using her power for something that truly mattered. But across town, Catherine Blackwood was making calls of her own. The timeline had just accelerated, and Emma Ashford was about to become the most valuable and endangered little girl in New York City. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. Victoria's call connected and she began speaking in the calm, authoritative voice that had built empires and destroyed competitors. "This is Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Industries. I need to speak with someone about a $50 million fraud case, and I need to speak with them tonight." Marcus watched her work, seeing for the first time the full force of what Victoria Ashford could accomplish when she stopped trying to balance being a mother with being a businesswoman and started using every tool at her disposal to protect her child. It was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. But even as Victoria spoke with federal agents and Marcus cross-referenced financial records, neither of them noticed the small figure standing in the doorway of the office, having slipped past sleeping security guards with the supernatural quiet that had defined her for 6 years. Emma had heard everything. Emma stood in the shadows of the doorway, processing information that would have overwhelmed most adults. Her father had stolen money. Bad people wanted to hurt her. Marcus used to be a policeman who lost his little girl. But Emma wasn't most children. 6 years of silence had taught her to observe, to understand, to see patterns that others missed. And right now she could see something the adults couldn't. They were all trying to save her, but they were missing the most important piece of the puzzle. She stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. "Emma!" Victoria spun around, dropping her phone. "Sweetheart, how did you get here?" "Elevators work at night too," Emma said matter-of-factly. "And security guards sleep when they think no one's watching." Marcus closed his laptop quickly, but Emma had already seen enough. "Emma, you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." "Everything's dangerous," Emma replied with wisdom that seemed impossible for a 6-year-old. "But I know something you don't know." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, her heart breaking at having to have this conversation. "Baby, we're trying to fix things so that—" "Daddy's not dead," Emma interrupted quietly. The room fell completely silent. Victoria felt the world tilt on its axis. "What did you say?" "Daddy's not dead," Emma repeated. "He calls sometimes at night when you're working late. He talks to me." Victoria's hands began to shake. "Emma, that's not possible. Your father disappeared 2 years ago." "He didn't disappear," Emma said patiently. "He hid. Like Marcus hid. Like we're gonna have to hide." Marcus leaned forward, his detective instincts overriding his shock. "Emma, when did your daddy last call you?" "Yesterday," Emma said. "He said bad people were coming and that I should be ready to be very quiet again if I needed to." Victoria felt like she was drowning. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma's expression was heartbreakingly mature. "Because Daddy said the bad people were listening. And because you cry when you talk about Daddy, and I don't like it when you cry." Victoria pulled Emma into her arms, her mind racing. If Richard was alive, if he'd been in contact with Emma, then everything they thought they knew was wrong. "Emma," Marcus said gently, "did your daddy tell you where he was? Or how to reach him?" Emma nodded and pulled a small device from her pajama pocket, a burner phone that looked like a toy but clearly wasn't. "He gave me this last month, said it was our secret phone for emergencies." Emma looked between the two adults. "This feels like an emergency." Victoria stared at the phone as if it might explode. He's been watching you, talking to you." "For how long?" "Since I was 4, Emma said simply. "Right after the loud night when Mama cried a lot and policemen came to the house. The night Richard had supposedly disappeared." Victoria remembered it clearly. The police, the questions, the assumption that he'd been killed or kidnapped. But he'd been alive all along, hiding, watching his daughter grow up from a distance. "Emma," Victoria said carefully, "do you want to call your daddy?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Will it help save Marcus? Will it make the bad lady go away?" "I don't know, sweetheart, but it might give us answers." Emma nodded and pressed a single button on the device. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Emma? Baby, it's late. Are you okay?" "Hi, Daddy," Emma said in her soft, clear voice. "Mama and Marcus are here. We know about the bad people now." There was a long pause, then Richard's voice again, strained and urgent. "Put me on speaker, Emma. We need to talk." Victoria activated the speaker function with trembling hands. "Hello, Richard." "Victoria." Richard's voice carried 3 years of pain and regret. "I'm sorry for all of this, for everything." "Where are you?" Victoria demanded. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find me. But that's about to change." Richard's voice was grim. "Catherine found me 6 months ago. She's been using me to watch Emma, to report on her development, her abilities." "What abilities?" Marcus interjected. "Emma isn't just unusually perceptive," Richard said. She has what some people call perfect recall. She remembers everything she sees, everything she hears, with absolute clarity. Every conversation, every face, every detail. Victoria looked down at her daughter with new understanding. The blocks, the patterns. You're not just playing, are you? Emma shook her head. I'm remembering. Everything. Including the things the bad people said when they thought I wasn't listening. Richard's voice cut through their amazement. Victoria, Emma has been recording evidence against Meridian Holdings without even knowing it. Every conversation she's overheard, every meeting she's witnessed, it's all stored in her memory with perfect clarity. Which is why Catherine wants her, Marcus said, pieces falling into place. Not just to control me or to settle my debt, Richard confirmed. They want to know what Emma knows, and then they want to make sure she never tells anyone. Victoria felt ice form in her veins. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, Richard said grimly. Victoria, you have maybe 6 hours before they make their move. Catherine's people are already positioning around the building. Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve. Mama, I know where Daddy is. Everyone turned to look at the 6-year-old who had just upended everything they thought they knew. He's in the building, Emma said simply. 3 floors down. He's been there for 2 weeks. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Richard had been hiding in Victoria's own building, watching over Emma from a distance, waiting for the moment when their daughter's gift would either save them all or destroy everything. That moment had arrived. 20 minutes later, they stood in the sub-basement of Victoria's building, in a maintenance room Emma had somehow known existed. Richard Ashford looked nothing like the polished businessman Victoria had married 8 years ago. His hair was longer, his face weathered by 3 years of running, but his eyes held the same intensity that had first attracted her. You look good, Victoria, he said quietly. Motherhood suits you. Don't, Victoria said sharply. Don't you dare pretend this is a social call. You abandoned us. You stole $50 million and disappeared, leaving Emma and me to deal with the consequences. I left to protect you, Richard said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Meridian Holdings doesn't just launder money, Victoria. They traffic children, specifically children with unusual gifts. When they realized what Emma could do, what exactly can she do? Marcus interrupted. Richard knelt down to Emma's level. Show them, sweetheart. Show them what you showed me. Emma looked uncertain for a moment, then walked to a wall covered in building blueprints. She studied them for exactly 30 seconds, then turned back to the adults. This building has 14 floors above ground, 4 below. Emergency exits on floors 2, 7, and 12. Security stations at the main entrance, parking garage, and service entrance. Guard rotation changes every 8 hours at 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and 10 p.m. She paused, then continued in the same calm tone. The bad lady brought 12 people with her. 4 are watching the main entrance, 3 in the parking garage, 2 on the 7th floor, 2 on the roof, and 1 in the apartment building across the street with a sniper rifle. The adults stared at her in stunned silence. How could you possibly know that? Victoria whispered. I watched from the windows while you were talking to the FBI, Emma said simply. I count everything, I remember everything, I see patterns other people miss. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. Emma, that's not normal. I know, Emma said without embarrassment. But it's useful. Richard stood up, his expression grim. Meridian Holdings has been tracking children like Emma for decades. Perfect memory, pattern recognition, analytical abilities that exceed most adults. They call them assets. The plan was to kidnap Emma, train her, and use her abilities for intelligence gathering and financial crimes. Over my dead body, Victoria repeated, but this time her voice carried the cold fury of a mother protecting her child. That was always an option, Richard said. But then Emma did something they didn't expect. She chose to speak. She chose to trust people, and that changed everything. How? Marcus asked. Because children with emotional bonds fight back, Richard explained. Children who feel loved and protected don't cooperate with their captors. Emma's connection to you, Victoria, and to Marcus, it makes her useless to them as an asset. Emma looked up at the adults with those impossibly blue eyes. So they want to make me not love anyone anymore? The simple question cut through all their careful explanations and strategic thinking. This was about a little girl who had finally learned to trust, finally learned to love, and there were people who wanted to destroy that to use her gifts. Not if we stop them first, Victoria said, her voice steel. How? Richard asked. Catherine has us surrounded. She has enough evidence to destroy all of us, and she has resources we can't match. Marcus looked at Emma, seeing not just a child with unusual abilities, but a little girl who had been forced to grow up too fast, to understand too much. Emma, when you watched the bad people, did you see any patterns? Anything that might help us? Emma nodded seriously. They're not watching the steam tunnels, and they don't know about the old subway entrance in the 4th basement. How do you know about that? Victoria asked. I explore when you're in meetings, Emma said matter-of-factly. Buildings have secrets like people do. Richard looked at his daughter with something approaching awe. Emma, can you get us out of the building without the bad people seeing us? Yes, Emma said immediately. But not yet. Why not yet? Emma's expression was serious beyond her years. Because if we run, they'll just chase us forever. But if we're smart, we can make them go away for good. Victoria knelt down beside her daughter. What are you thinking, sweetheart? I'm thinking, Emma said carefully, that I remember everything the bad people said. Every name, every plan, every secret, Anne. And if the right people heard those secrets, the FBI, Marcus breathed. But they'd need proof, Richard said. Emma's testimony wouldn't be enough. Emma smiled for the first time since entering the maintenance room. Who says it would just be testimony? She pulled out a small device Victoria had never seen before, something that looked like a toy recorder but clearly wasn't. Daddy gave me this 6 months ago. I've been recording everything just like he taught me. Emma's smile widened. I have 6 hours of Catherine talking about murders and kidnapping and money laundering, and I know exactly who to give it to. The adults stared at this remarkable 6-year-old who had been playing a deeper game than any of them realized. Emma, Victoria said slowly, have you been planning this? I've been getting ready, Emma corrected. For when the bad people finally came, Daddy said they would, and I wanted to be ready to protect my family. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. This brave little girl had been carrying the weight of protecting them all, and none of them had even known. Okay, Victoria said, her voice steady with new resolve. Let's finish this, all of us together. But as they began to plan their next move, none of them noticed the tiny camera hidden in the maintenance room's ventilation system, or the woman watching them from a command center 3 blocks away. Catherine Blackwood had been listening to every word, and she was already adapting her strategy. The final game was about to begin. Dawn was breaking over Manhattan, as Victoria's building became the center of the most unusual standoff in FBI history. Special Agent Sarah Chen stood in the command center that had been hastily set up in the lobby, listening to 6 hours of recorded conversations that detailed enough federal crimes to put dozens of people away for life. This recording device, Agent Chen said, holding up Emma's tiny recorder. Where did a 6-year-old get military-grade surveillance equipment? Her father, Victoria said simply. He's been preparing for this day for 3 years. Emma sat in a chair beside Victoria, wearing headphones and talking quietly into a microphone. Every word she spoke was being compared to the recordings, and every detail was matching perfectly. Her memory was indeed flawless. Mama, Emma said, pulling off the headphones. The nice FBI lady wants to know about the money. Agent Chen leaned forward. Emma, you mentioned hearing conversations about bank accounts. Can you remember the numbers? Emma nodded and proceeded to recite 17 different account numbers, routing codes, and transfer amounts, all from memory. Agent Chen's eyes widened as she realized they were looking at the complete financial records of one of the largest criminal enterprises in North America. Mrs. Ashford, Agent Chen said quietly, your daughter just handed us enough evidence to dismantle an international crime syndicate. And Catherine Blackwood? Marcus asked. Is currently barricaded on the 7th floor with what's left of her team, Agent Chen replied. We've arrested 11 of her people, but she's holding out. She's waiting for something, Richard said from where he stood near the windows. Catherine doesn't give up, she adapts. As if summoned by his words, Victoria's phone rang. The caller ID showed simply, C. Put it on speaker, Agent Chen instructed. Victoria answered. Hello, Catherine. Congratulations, Victoria. Catherine's voice was calm, almost amused. You've played this very well. Better than I expected. It's over, Catherine. Surrender now and maybe the FBI will consider a plea deal. Catherine's laugh was like ice. Oh, my dear Victoria, you think this was about money? About crime syndicate? This was always about Emma. The room fell silent. What do you mean? Victoria asked, though she was afraid she already knew. I represent interests far beyond Meridian Holdings, Catherine said. There are governments, corporations, organizations that would pay billions for a child with Emma's abilities. The recordings, the evidence, the FBI raid, it's all just theater. You're surrounded. Agent Chen said sharply. There's nowhere to run. Who said anything about running? Catherine replied. I just needed everyone in one place. The lights in the building suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but it was too late. In that moment of confusion, the unthinkable happened. Emma was gone. Victoria screamed her daughter's name, but only silence answered. Somehow, in the space of a power outage that lasted less than 10 seconds, Catherine Blackwood had managed to take Emma from a room full of FBI agents. How is that possible? Agent Chen demanded, speaking rapidly into her radio. Marcus was already moving toward the stairs. Catherine's been planning this for months. She knows this building better than we do. They found the answer on the 7th floor, where Catherine's last stand turned out to be an elaborate misdirection. The room was empty except for a laptop playing looped audio to make it sound like people were still inside. But Emma's voice came through the building's intercom system, calm and clear. It's okay, Mama, I'm okay and I'm ready. Emma, Victoria called out to the empty air. Where are you? Roof, Emma's voice replied. Catherine thinks she's very smart, but she made a mistake. What mistake? Agent Chen asked, speaking toward the intercom. She thinks I'm helpless, Emma said, and there was something in her 6-year-old voice that sounded ancient and wise. She thinks being little means being weak. She doesn't understand that I've been watching her for 6 months. I know all her patterns, too. The building's elevator suddenly activated, rising smoothly to the roof level. Emma, Victoria said desperately, don't do anything dangerous. We're coming. I know you are, Emma replied. And Catherine knows, too. That's why she's about to make her biggest mistake. They reached the roof to find Catherine Blackwood standing near the edge, holding Emma's hand. A helicopter circled overhead, preparing to land. Stay back, Catherine called out as they emerged from the elevator. One more step and I drop her. But Emma looked completely calm, even serene. She looked directly at her mother and spoke in a voice that carried across the rooftop wind. Mama, remember what Marcus taught us? Sometimes the most important things we have to say come from somewhere deeper than our voices. Victoria felt her heart stop as she understood what Emma was really saying. Emma had been recording everything. Again. You've been talking for the last 10 minutes, Catherine, Emma said conversationally, about the governments you work for, about the other children you've taken, about the senators you've bribed and the judges you own. And this little recorder Daddy gave me? It's been broadcasting everything to the FBI computers downstairs. Catherine's face went white as she realized she'd been outmaneuvered by a 6-year-old. You see, Emma continued in that same calm voice, I learned something important from my mama and Marcus. When you love people, you protect them, and when you protect them, you become stronger than the people who want to hurt them. Emma stepped away from Catherine with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved, who knew she was safe, who knew her family would always come for her. Catherine lunged forward, but Marcus was already moving. In one fluid motion that recalled his days as a detective, he tackled Catherine to the ground as FBI agents swarmed the rooftop. Victoria ran to Emma and swept her into her arms, tears streaming down her face. You brilliant, brave, terrifying little girl, she whispered. I told you I was ready, Emma said simply, hugging her mother tight. Richard joined them, and for a moment they stood together as a family while Catherine Blackwood was arrested and read her rights. The helicopter above them circled once more before flying away, its passengers realizing their plan had failed. Is it over? Victoria asked Agent Chen. With the evidence Emma gathered, we'll be unraveling this network for years, Agent Chen replied. But for you? Yes, it's over. Marcus knelt down beside Emma as the FBI led Catherine away. You saved us all, sunshine. We saved each other, Emma corrected. That's what families do. As the sun rose fully over Manhattan, casting golden light across the city that had tried to steal Emma's voice, her freedom, her very identity, the little girl who had been silent for 6 years looked out at the world with new eyes. She had found her voice not in words alone, but in the courage to use her gifts to protect the people she loved. And surrounded by her mother, her father, and the man who had first shown her that silence could be powerful, but that speaking truth was even stronger, Emma Ashford smiled. Some stories end with words. This one ended with understanding. That family isn't just about blood or law or convenience. It's about choosing to see each other, to protect each other, and to find strength in the spaces between words where love lives. Emma had spent 6 years learning to listen. Now, finally, she was ready to be heard. And the world, for the first time in her young life, was ready to listen.